Hi everyone, it's a brand new day here for Youth Commedia Virtual. Alright, so today we're going to talk about the GOAT sheet, with G-O-T-E, scene breakdowns and given circumstances. Now these particular things are not something that we've gone over in previous years, but they're still important, especially when it comes to acting these scenes out, okay? And something especially to consider when you're writing the scenarios too. Having motivations and obstacles and whatnot are important for characters. They're three-dimensional. So these three things are different ways to break down scenarios, scenes, and characters to better understand the reasons that the events within the story are unfolding. All right, that's literally what your workbook says. And there's a reason that it's there. Okay, all of these things are used to break down these stories into a more molecular level. To be
molecular?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. I'm tired. To be better understood. Okay.
If you're wondering why we're going over fancy worksheets like this when we haven't done it in previous years, part of it is because we've never focused on writing scenarios in previous years. Like the graduating kids have done it, but we've never had the whole group do it. There is always the reason that Kale and I are paying for fancy theater degrees where they make us do these worksheets, and we are both considering careers in education, and we want to see how they work with different age groups. Can't lie, that's a reason. But it really is because we're focusing more on writing, and they're super, super useful. Like, my concentration in my degree is dramatic writing and dramaturgy, which I'm not going to explain, but, like, look it up if you want to. It's cool. And understanding how conflict and, like, how the scenes work together and all of that is very, very important when you're writing a scenario, so.
Absolutely, and my minor is actually in theater history and literature, so being able to break these things apart is literally imperative to fully understand it. So let's, and I do also want to mention that though your homework today is going to include doing these for practice, that does not mean that you have to write these down for every scene you do, for every scenario you do. After time, when you get used to it, these are things you can just do mentally, okay? You can make mental notes about certain things and actions and all that. But in order to get your brain to start functioning that way, it helps to write it down, to physically see how that layout works, which is why that's going to be your homework assignment. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about is the GOAT sheet, or the G-O-T-E sheet, okay? This particular sheet...
Not a cool sheet with a mini goat animal friend, like I thought it was at first.
Right.
Sorry.
People call these different things. This is what my particular school uses. And the reason we're going over multiples of these things is that different schools use different tactics to teach this. And we want to kind of get a broad version.
And every actor finds one that they like. All three of these can work in tandem, but like different actors will find that one of them is more important for them in the process than the other, and they'll do that for the rest of their life. If you decide to take a theater class in college and you see this, you'll be like, oh, that's what Kale and Monka made me do that summer. Because, like, no, really, colleges and conservatories all over the country and the world use some variation of one of these three things.
Absolutely.
So we're giving you a college class for free.
You're welcome. So, first one we're talking about is the GOAT sheet, okay? The G-O-T-E, all right, it is your goal, your obstacle, your tactics, and your expectation, okay? This is something that you do on the actual script or scenario that you have itself, like the physical paper copy, okay? The first thing that is done is you break the scene down into units. And in order to do that, oh Lord, in order to do that, you need to be very familiar with the scenario or the script, okay, or with where it's going. Once you know that and you can pick out the different goals throughout it, even if it's short and there's only one goal, okay, that means there's one. You do a unit per goal. It's the easiest way to explain it for the goat sheet, okay? Once you find that goal or goals, I usually actually draw a physical line on the scenario so that I know where things change. And at that point, it is broken down into the G, O, and T, and E. So you find your goal, and we're going to go over the example that I have in your workbook as an example. So I have Arlecchino's Kitchen from, it was either last year or 2 years ago that we did, okay? And you know what? Let me share my screen so we can go over it that way. Look at me being all smart with technology. I know, right? Now
So proud of you.
All right. There it is. Look at that. Okay, so this is what it should look like on yours. I don't have the scene breakdown in here yet because this is still a work in progress, but we will get there. So for this particular one, because it is a very, very short scenario, there is only one goal, which is, at least for Arlecchino. The way that the goat works is that it is based on each individual character. Okay? It is not the characters as a whole. So it's your own character. And I wrote this as if I was doing this for Arlecchino. My goat sheet would be a lot different if it was for Brighella or if it was for Columbina. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, the goal for Arlecchino in this is to create his own food business. His obstacle, or the thing that's keeping him from attaining that goal, is that he has absolutely no knowledge of business whatsoever, right? Next is tactics. Tactics are the actions or words spoken trying to have the character achieve their goal, okay, or working towards their goal. So, for example, in green, he asks for help. So Arlecchino tells Columbina about the idea, and she decides it may actually be a good one. So the first thing he does to try to achieve this goal is he asks for help. The second one in blue is relying on Columbina's judgment. She knows just a man who does know how to get a business started, so she calls for Brighella. So he is relying on her judgment. That's his second tactic. And the last thing is the expectation. So the expectation is what your specific character wants this whole situation to work out as. Like, what do you expect? It's the easiest way to explain it. In this case, it's to have a successful food-based business. And with the goat sheet, that expectation can either succeed or fail. It does not, like, if the expectation is to have a successful food business, it fails in this case, and that's okay. The expectation does not have to succeed every time, okay? Now, the expectation for, say, Columbina may either change or succeed depending on what side you take, okay? So this is a very basic example of a goat sheet, okay? The next part is the given circumstances. The given circumstances is both broad and specific at the same time. And let me explain why, okay? It goes into detail about the scene and the specific character. But it is not goal-oriented, okay? So this one, it just kind of helps you set the scene. So in this example, Arlecchino, I put him in this teens, education level, minimal education. We all know this. Okay, but I want to jump down to what happened just before the scene began that led to the current situation. Now, with given circumstances, a lot of the times you can—
A moment before.
Huh?
Sorry, it's called a moment before in my acting classes.
Haha! See? Commonalities. All right, so, this particular one, you want to try to read through the scenario or read through the script to see if you can discern that this information was already given. If it is not, it's up to you to find a logical excuse for this scene happening. Okay? For example, because this is a very short scenario, there's not a lot of information to go off of for what happened before the scene started, right? So, I just wrote that there was frustration with his current employer, okay? And in red, I have, notice how this approach can change the entrance entirely. Because now, if he's frustrated, Arlecchino is going to enter the scene a lot differently than having woken up from a dream of having his own business, right? So it's going to change the entire beginning of the scene and how he reacts to things, possibly his tactics, everything else. Okay, so first thing, try to discern this information from the scenario. If you can't, use logic to figure out the next steps. Okay, and I have a blank one down here for you to use as well for your homework. Yay. And then the last thing to go over is your scene breakdown. Whenever you're ready, Monica.
Oh, okay. So before going into the scene breakdowns, can you scroll back down to given circumstances for a second?
Absolutely.
I want to say that at my university, given circumstances are described as things that are only explicitly stated in the script. So this isn't necessarily contradicting what Kale is having you do. It's just another way to interpret the assignment because, like we said, every university has it done differently. My school splits it into given circumstances and open circumstances. So, like, name and occupation could be given circumstances, but age isn't stated in the script or in the scenario. And education level can be inferred, but isn't actually explicitly stated. And what happened just before the scene began that led to the current situation isn't explicitly stated. It's a moment before. So those would be something that my university calls open circumstances. So you have more play with them. So I don't know if you wanted to consider potentially that you might be able to have a little bit more creativity with those things because whoever wrote the scenario hasn't enforced what those things have to be. Because like age versus name, Arlecchino, you know what it is, but age, you don't. You have to justify your answers most of the time, but you do get to have more say in it. So I do
want to add that the justification part is also part of the given circumstances from my school. Though we don't separate it, you still need to explain why you're changing this or adding this or whatever the case may be, so that it makes sense in conjunction with the rest of it. But continue.
Yeah, I would say the only real connection between all of these workshops and every university, regardless of anything else, is that they're going to require you to justify all of your choices. We probably won't do that to you, but well, we may not. We may, I don't know.
We'll see.
But if you decide to do any of this in college, plan for that. So scene breakdowns. Do you want to go back to the, that thing? There we go. So the difference between the GOAT and the scene breakdown is that all of it, actually. The only thing you're looking at in the scene breakdown is each step of the scene, if that makes sense. We refer to them as beats, B-E-A-T. So going through the scene, what you're looking at are the important points. So like Arlecchino entering, he's gonna start his own business, he knows he needs help. So like your first beat might be Columbina deciding to help Arlecchino. That might be one beat. And then Brigella entering even could be a beat because Brigella changes so much when he enters. So beats are just inherently a point in the scenario where something important happens, either conflict-wise or character-wise. So like if your character discovers something really important about the scene or about themselves, that could be a beat. Or if something happens conflict-wise, like Arlecchino deciding to start his business, that could be a beat. So usually we divide it into 2 or 3 beats. So either a 3-act or essentially a 3-act or 4-act play within a scene, if that. So you're taking one scene and dividing it into 3 or 4 acts. This is more complicated than the GOAT because I'm not an acting major at my school, so I have nowhere near as many examples of how to do a scene breakdown as Kale does of how to do a GOAT. But really, going through your scene, just look at it and say, okay, where in this moment does something change? And that's where you put the beat. So like in the first scene, in Arlecchino's scene, when he enters, that's where the beat is, because that's when something changes. In the next one, when Columbina enters, when Arlecchino decides to tell her about the business, something changes. And then when Columbina decides to call for Brigella, something changes. Because what would have happened instead if Columbina had just decided to do the business with Arlecchino herself? That would have been a completely different business and a completely different scenario. We have that scenario, like probably written down somewhere. In this one, Columbina explaining the idea to Brigella, that's not where it changes. It's Brigella deciding to help that changes it. And then Arlecchino realizing that he would have to give up food because then he decides that makes him realize he doesn't actually want to go through with the business anymore. And Columbina and Brigella deciding to continue planning the business. So I hope that makes sense. You can email me with any questions about this. This is a slightly different way of doing a scene breakdown because, unsurprisingly, doing a scene breakdown for an improvised scenario is very different from doing a scene breakdown for a script where you actually have to follow every word that's written down for you. But I hope that makes sense, and that should help you understand, like, very specifically why every action in your scenario happens. So that's a scene breakdown.
Okay, awesome. So now you've got a basic understanding of given circumstance, the GOAT sheet, and scene breakdowns. So now it's time for your homework. Yay. So what you're going to do is you can look over the given example. The one that we went over today is the one in your workbook, okay? So you'll be able to look back over that to study it more, be able to freeze frame on something if you need to, okay? There is a secondary scenario included. It is a different one so that you can do this on your own, along with a blank version of the given circumstances worksheet. Okay, you can choose any character in the practice scenario with which to try your hand on these. Okay, so obviously the scene breakdown, it's not specific to that one character. Okay, but the GOAT sheet and the given circumstances are going to be specific to one character. I don't really care who you choose. This one's got a couple of options, so pick who you need to pick All right, and then
Also, you can choose different points for your scene breakdown versus the ones I chose.
right.
It's what you feel are the important points where things change.
Exactly. Okay, so that being said, this is the last video in our video series for Youth Commedia. We've been over what Commedia is, we've been over writing scenarios, and we've been over improvisation, and now the goat sheet given circumstances and scene breakdowns. Now, I want you guys to know that I'm going to leave this Google Classrooms intact so that these videos will stay here. Okay, that way if you ever need to refer back to them on something, you can do that, and you'll also still have access to the workbook at the same time. Okay? So, if you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you